As I mentioned above, the question of exposure versus instruction was a central topic during questioning. Let's look at some of the highlights.
Could you spend a minute or two to explain why the record shows that the children are more than merely exposed to these sorts of things in the storybooks?
No, we know that the teachers are required to use the books. When the books were first introduced in August of 2022, the board suggested they be used 5 times before the end of the year. That's in that's at 273A in the CERT appendix. One of the schools, the Sherwood School in June, for Pride Month, said that they were going to read 1 book each day to celebrate Pride Month. The board's own testimony through Superintendent Hazel said that the books must be used as part of the instruction, and that at 642 in the appendix, that discussion will ensue.
It was not as if these books were in the school library or on classroom bookshelves and available to students. The board was not only suggested they be used multiple times in one school year, but one school made a point of reading them to celebrate Pride Month. That's a celebration of deviant sexual behavior, including parades and other events consisting of people in lewd dress, often engaging in suggestive, if not pornographic activities. Why did the board want this as a mandatory instruction?
That was the entire point of withdrawing the opt-outs and removing, even notifying parents. They're not even allowed to know. The board said in that statement it was so that every student would be taught from the inclusivity storybooks. And also the district court transcript at 63 has counsel's admission that some of the books have to be used and it can be more.
The average point was not merely to expose children as young as 3 to 4 years old to these ideas, but to instruct them to both celebrate and normalize them. Justice Sotomayor and Mr. Baxter got into quite an exchange about the topic of exposure versus coercion.
Let's go back. Is it generally that the mere exposure, haven't we made very clear that the mere exposure to things that you object to is not coercion?
It would really depend on the individual religious beliefs. Here, for example, our Catholic clients...
So what you're saying is that the exposure of children to the fact that 2 people are getting married is coercion? That 2 people of the same sex are getting married is coercion?
Justice Sotomayor sounds more like a prosecuting attorney on cross-examination than a justice of the Supreme Court. Of course, she was not the only one to interrupt Mr. Baxter, but you should get the flavor of this line of questioning. She also seems to ignore the fact that looking at pictures was not all that was included in this curriculum.
For reality's sake, you see interfaith couples all the time walking around. You see interracial couples walking around. You see women on this court in positions of work outside the home.
And no one here is raising a burden in that situation. We're far beyond that.
The point that both Justice Sotomayor and Mr. Baxter seem to miss is that there's a difference between exposure to something as you go about your business and being compelled by law and policy to expose your children to it. Furthermore, as we'll see, this is not mere exposure, but indoctrination, since the teachers were encouraged to both make these books part of the instruction and to correct those who disagree with their message. Take, for example, this interchange between Justice Barrett and Mr. Schoenfeld for the respondents.
This is an instruction to the teacher. If a student observes that a girl can only like boys because she's a girl, the board suggested that the teacher disrupt the student's either-or thinking by saying something like, actually, people of any gender can like whoever they like. Or on the transgender issue, when we're born, people make a guess about our gender and label us boy or girl based on our body parts. Sometimes they're right, sometimes they're wrong. When someone's transgender, they guess wrong. When someone's cisgender, they guessed right. So, it's kind of along those things, which seem to be more about influence, right, and shaping of ideas and less about communicating respect, because it's less about communicating respect for those, who are transgender, who are gay, and more about how to think about sexuality. What is your take on that and how we think about this, whether this really is just about exposure and civility and learning to function in a multicultural and diverse society, and how much of it is about influence, or as petitioners would say, indoctrination?
Certainly. I think what you've quoted, Your Honor, are suggested responses or proposed responses for age-appropriate ways to respond to questions that may arise in response to these texts or otherwise. The same response about disrupt the either-or thinking is given when someone says dresses are for girls, boys can't paint their nails, those are boy toys. These are simply ways of contextualizing the information that's being learned and to give students the predicates for being able to respect each other. The express directive from the school is you don't need to understand your peers, you don't need to agree with them, you don't need to affirm with them, but you do need to treat them with respect.
Except the expressed message directive from the school is that one side is right and the other is wrong. The instruction isn't, there are people who believe this and we should treat them the way we would want to be treated. Rather, it's promoting these agendas by claiming they are right and opposition is, by definition, wrong. To a young child, this is the equivalent of telling them their parents are wrong. How can that not be indoctrination? Justice Alito got into the questioning.
The book has a clear message, and a lot of people think it's a good message, and maybe it is a good message, but it's a message that a lot of people who hold on to traditional religious beliefs don't agree with. I don't think anybody can read that and say, well, this is just telling children that there are occasions when men marry other men. Uncle Bobby gets married to his boyfriend Jamie, and everybody's happy, and everything is, it portrays this. Everyone accepts this, except for the little girl, Chloe, who has reservations about it. But her mother corrects her. No, you shouldn't have any reservations about this. As I said, it has a clear moral message.
Wait a minute.
Yes, these books have clear moral messages, and contrary to what is being argued by Mr. Schoenfeld, this is not a case of mere exposure, but coercion and indoctrination into the message these books promote. Justice Jackson tried to come up with an analogy that would fit her understanding of the situation.
I'm just trying to find an analogous public benefit outside of the school context and ask you whether your position is that it substantially burdens the rights of religious parents if there are advertisements on a public bus that say things that they don't want their children exposed to.
I think a better analogy to what the schools are doing would be to consider how the parent instructs the child to deal with the advertising. A parent could teach their children to simply turn their gaze away from such advertisements, while the school is effectively saying, no, you must look because it's right. Justice Gorsuch brought up another point.
Correct.
Yeah, okay. And you've included these in the English language curriculum rather than the human sexuality curriculum to influence students. Is that fair? That's what the district court found. Do you agree
I
with
think
that?
to the extent the district court found that it was to influence them towards civility. The natural consequence of being exposed
Whatever, but to influence them.
in the manner that I just mentioned, yes.
Yes, even the attorney for the board admits this curriculum is to influence the children. However, as we've seen, it's not towards civility, but acceptance.